Welcome to Take It from the Iron Woman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Iron Woman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Iron Woman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. Take it from the Iron Woman. We only have special guests, and today we're going to the Washington, D.C. area with Lauren. Very excited to have Lauren with us. Lauren, welcome, first of all, and introduce yourself. Who's Lauren who's going to join us today?
Thank you, Suzanne. This is Lauren Pompey. I'm excited to be on your podcast today and live from the Washington, D.C. area. I'm excited.
I'm very excited to have you with your background as an artist, as a dancer. When did that all start? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a funny story, Suzanne. Originally, I started when I was 5 years old dancing, and I trained ever since then in classical ballet. But I was originally supposed to start taking gymnastics lessons. And I suppose at the time, my parents thought that it was a little less risky if I did something that was a bit more quote unquote grounded. Instead of taking gymnastics, they transitioned me into ballet classes. I started my training in New York. And then from there, I took everything. I took tap, I took jazz, a bit of lyrical, but it was always consistent with ballet. And I was very much invested in all of my classes after school and at the weekends. From there, it just grew and grew and grew. And it's become my primary passion. So even to this day, I work full time, but it is something that I enjoy watching performances and training whenever I have the opportunity.
It looks so elegant. And I always feel like it looks so easy, but then I know a friend of mine always says, if it looks easy, there's a lot of work behind it. Tell us a little bit, 5 years old, you always wanted to do that, because sometimes we also hear of like people in sports that the parents are pushing you. How did you develop your passion and how did you sustain that in a way?
One of the things that it's important to remember, Suzanne, that if you are captivated, if you're drawn to something, there's no other external element that could really distract you, that could deter you from what you're passionate about. And that was, for me, that was dance. I started off with a couple of lessons after school. And then once I got to high school level, I was training with a pre-professional program in New Jersey, the New Jersey Dance Theater Ensemble. Got into a Nutcracker season, spring season. I was learning different repertoire. My weekends were pretty much packed. I had a very rigorous schedule since I was 15 years old, and I got used to it. And it didn't ever feel like work to me. It was never exhausting in a negative way. I was always excited and happy to stay up till 10 p.m., of course, after I finished my homework and anything else, and to just keep dancing, to keep training, to keep exploring, different creative opportunities. It was exciting for me. And I know, especially during Nutcracker season, preparing for those performances in the winter, those could be quite brutal and demanding as far as time was concerned, but I was always happy to just commit myself to the art form. And again, it never felt like work to me. It was something that I truly wanted to do. The thing with being a dancer is that it extends beyond commitment. It requires your full self, quite literally. Physically, it's demanding, especially when I started learning point. It became a little bit painful, but there's a lot that does go on behind the scenes that the audience will never know about. But that's quite the beauty of it. That's the magic of performing, is that anything that goes on behind the wings is a bit more secret. And then, of course, the audience sees the final presentation, and it's meant to captivate and inspire and move audiences. So that was exciting for me. It was well worth whatever would happen behind the scenes.
I'm sure. And tell us a little bit about the magic and what's happening behind the scenes. What was the movie called with the dancing? Was it Black Swan or something with a swan?
I think it was Black Swan with Natalie Portman. And so that's one of the most infamous ballets, classical ballets. So it's not, It's not exactly like the movie, of course, in Hollywood, things have to be dramatized a bit,
Yeah.
but that film does manage to capture the essence of grueling work that goes on behind the scenes and then the beauty that's portrayed on stage. As a dancer, I trained in classical ballet, and then I moved more towards modern art form, which is a bit more grounded movement, and there's room for exploration in there. But with both techniques, there's countless hours of rehearsals. For example, I went to Mason Gross School of the Arts in New Jersey. That was my focus for 4.5 years. We would have rehearsals in between our regular liberal arts courses. And then at the weekends, you would be prone to injury. You would be prone to long hours and balancing time and a heavy amount of critique. But that was one of the things that helped me to grow as a person, helped me to grow as an artist, was being able to receive critique, whether that was in a physical sense, an artistic form, channeling all of that feedback into the next rehearsal, into my next class. Sometimes when we look at these movies, we hear stories about different companies, different dance companies, and you're just seeing the final product. You're just seeing the performance. But when I think back to my time in rehearsals, I'm thinking about all of the little adjustments I would make and taking that feedback and really, really applying it to every bar exercise, every center exercise. And it's quite literally at a minuscule level, whether that's working through your articulation in your foot, to your port de bras, to balancing, to pirouettes, and all the exercises and the forms of technique in between. And then just being proud and allowing that technique to show on stage or show in a class performance. I was excited about it every single time. There were some moments where I was a little bit nervous, but I'm telling you, once you get on stage and the lights come up and the curtains drawn, it's a whole new feeling, and it's different every single time with every single performance.
And I get the passion when I hear you talking. I'm wondering, when you talk about feedback and critique, what can you take in your day-to-day job in a way? Like, I mean, I'm only a runner or a triathlete. You have a coach and they want to make you faster, but you also spoke about details. So it feels like in ballet, you're rehearsing. How can you transfer that into the job that you're doing today?
When we think about receiving feedback, receiving critique, most often we just look at it as a reflection, as a negative reflection. And one of the things that dance helped me to understand was that it's not always a means of limiting your capabilities, whether that's physical or in theoretical sense. It's a means to look deeper. And I was constantly looking deeper. I think as an artist, that's something that comes very naturally to me and to so many others, where you become used to constant reflection, inner reflection, and exploration of, experimenting in this way. Well, how would I move if I moved in this space? Or how would timing change in this sense? Or if I'm not finding my center, if my breathing is a little bit off, or whatever your critique was given during that time, how can I change it? And what does this do within my body? What does this do within my mind when I try it again? When you start thinking about it that way, you feel limitless. You feel like you're not really bound by something that maybe discourages you from trying again. And I think that's one of the things that can be a bit scary when it comes to the art form, for the performing arts, is if you fall on stage or if you make a mistake or you miss a step in the choreography, you don't beat yourself up straight away. Take it as an opportunity. And that's something that I've had to do, is just quite literally pick yourself up again. And most often the audience doesn't really know the choreography. You just keep going. So in my day-to-day job now, Suzanne, I keep going. You just keep going. You can't ever stop. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is that you do really grow in that sense, and you discover new things about yourself. The deeper you're able to dig into yourself and reflect on what you've been told, or the advice you've been given, or the direction, the more that you're not limited by anything. If anything, it's prompting you to move forward, to grow in different directions and new directions. It's constantly new. It's being recreated over and over and over and over. And so you almost crave that all the time. If anything, I'm grateful for that.
And I think this is a fabulous lesson, whoever is listening here. Sometimes we get feedback and we're like, oh, this is critique. It hurts my ego. But when you think of your career as an artist, you hear critique every single time. And then if you make it on stage, you get the critique of the newspaper. You get critique from left, right, and center. You are used to this and you said, keep going. I know a lot of people say, don't read the reviews, or I think if you put the passion and the heart into it, that's what's most important.
Yes, absolutely. And it's fun along the way. I mean, if you're able to sort of laugh at yourself, if you're able to make light of the moment, and in the sense where if you were creating your own movements, there were opportunities where I had to create my own pieces. I choreographed a group piece with 6 or 7 dancers. I've created different solo performances. You take that feedback and those mistakes turn into new choreography, or just constantly getting used to questioning movement, questioning, well, what if I tried it in this sense? And I got used to that. And it was exciting. That made it exciting, the whole process. You do learn to appreciate seeing things from new perspectives. And again, I think that comes naturally to any artist, visual, musical, dancing, the whole realm of artistry.
I wanted to ask you another question. In a way, when I think about dance, it's also a way of communicating. Is that correct?
It is. They say there's this quote that I heard some time ago where everyone laughs in the same language. And dance is somewhat like that. Of course, there's some pieces that incorporates verbal cues and things like that. But for the most part, dance is a silent art form. We intertwine music into the choreography, or it could be entirely silent. But I appreciated it because growing up, I was quite shy. I didn't talk very much. The opportunity to be able to just dance and to move and to illustrate music in that visual sense was good for me. And then as I got older, I became more and more comfortable with just like self-expression in that way. There was a piece that I was in that it was called The Bystander. I worked on some research on it in Dublin, Ireland with Dance Ireland. And the piece was exploring the nature of looking at something, being a witness to something happening, and how different individuals react to something, whether it's tragic or an alarming event. And it was quite interesting for me because we didn't speak during that time. There was an object that was placed in the studio space and we had to just improvise. So improvisation is something that gives dancers the opportunity to be creative in the moment. So spontaneous movement. And with that, there's no communication verbally, and you just have to physically react. So just looking at how an individual reacts to something that changes in the space is quite fascinating. The focus of that research, that piece, was if something were like if a backpack was left in a subway or in a public setting, who would be the one to act upon it? Who would call for help? Who would just walk past it? So essentially the bystander. And so I thought about that for a while during that process, and how actions really do speak louder than words. It is, at the end of the day, about movement. One of my favorite quotes is by Martha Graham, "Movement never lies." And if you think about your personal relationships or events that happen in the media and you're looking at something, you're constantly looking at things. And when you think about human migration and traveling, it's quite literally movement. So you may not consider yourself to be a dancer, or someone might not consider themselves to be technically inclined to do those things or perform, but movement is at the basis of human nature. And I think it's quite fascinating if you look at it in that sense, and how it changes the course of life, the course of your personal life and the world as a whole.
And you mentioned like improvisation. And I teach a class in global talent management, and I had a guest speaker, and she said, actually, improvisation can be taught also in organization. So you basically have to communicate without talking, as you just said beautifully. And it's something new, right? So you have to learn something different. Obviously, that was before of the pandemic. They sent people to improv classes.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, improvisation is it's a technique that's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
I know that it's also done in theater as well, but I haven't heard it integrated into the workforce just yet. But that's interesting. Yeah, being used to spontaneity, being able to think in the moment, I think is an excellent skill in any field that you're in. And it seems to be becoming more and more necessary in current events. So I think being able to have that skill in general is essential.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
How inspiring. To me, it feels like a new vocabulary I'm learning. What are you learning? What are you taking away? Take it from the Iron Woman. We have episodes every Monday, every Wednesday. Don't miss out. There's something for everybody. And Take It from the Iron Woman is also a book. Order it on Amazon as an ebook or a paperback. Don't miss out. There's something for everybody.